right. Hello, everybody. As you guys get trickling on in here, I will do my little spiel and then we'll hand it on over to Bob. To get started, my name is Brianna Coma and I'm with Conservation Nebraska. Thank you so much for being here. We are so excited to learn more about edible wild plants for a third time with the awesome Bob tonight. A couple of reminders before we get started. Your cameras are all off and you are all muted, so you cannot be seen or heard. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to throw them in the chat box, the Q&A, and we will go over them kind of as we go through the presentation. We love to kind of just have it a discussion. So if we're talking about a plant and you've made something with it, throw it in the chat box, throw the recipe in there. Let us know what you've made with it if we don't talk about it. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so if you miss anything or want to share it with anybody, it will be posted on Conservation Nebraska's YouTube channel in just a few weeks. Oh, sorry, my screen went black there for a second. I got nervous.
Right. Don't do that to me.
And in just a second, a poll question will pop up on your screen. Just a few questions, and then there will be another one at the end with basically the same questions. This helps Conservation Nebraska to improve on future webinars and events. And if you do both the pre and poll, you will be entered into a pool of to win a $25 gift card. So that is super exciting. So make sure to do that. So with all of that being said, let's munch into the world of edible plants with Bob Henrickson. He is the Horticulture Program Coordinator with Nebraska's Statewide Arboretum, which is a program of the Nebraska Forest Service. Bob also hosts a live call-in gardening talk show called How's It Growin' on local radio station in Lincoln. So I will hand it on over to Bob to get us started.
All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm just caught myself looking at the questions saying, do I know these? I hope I know these. Right. Well, rest assured, people, if you don't know those questions, we're going to talk about them tonight. So anyway, let's see. Let me get this set up first. There we go. Can you see that okay, Brianna?
Yes, perfect.
All right, very good. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming on board this evening. I appreciate your time and this cool, important subject that we're talking about, wild edible plants, free food, foraging fun, whatever you want to call it. It's really, I became interested in my mentor, Kay Young. We just lost Kay Young recently. She wrote a book called Wild Seasons. That's a great reference for you to seek out and get. It's available through Amazon. Just type in Wild Seasons, Kay Young. And it was kind of my Bible. I since then have acquired 3 other wild edible books, and there's some amazing stuff online there, like Forager Chef is really good too. So I know Brianna's posted those sources for you in the past, and so that is available. And as she mentioned, there's 2 other parts. Really, you just have to type in Wild Edible Plants of Nebraska, and you'll be able to find the other 2. Yeah, so easy to do, easy to do. So anyway, without further ado, let's just rattle right into this. Last time when I talked, I ran out of time, and I was mainly talking about trees. And one of the questions in that survey was, what is considered the most powerful medicine worldwide? And that is the linden. I have here the American linden. This is our native linden. It's native to the eastern part of the state, along the Missouri River, and it'll follow the Platte a little ways, heading west. But the American linden is really an overlooked species that needs to be planted more, because most of the lindens that are planted around here are called the little leaf linden. And the little leaf linden comes from Europe. And that's fine, because what we're talking about tonight with the health benefits, either the American linden will work or the European linden will work. And I can tell you there's many more little leaf lindens around Lincoln than American lindens, so it's going to be easier for you to find. And lindens, unfortunately, are pretty much done blooming now. We missed it by a couple, 3 weeks. and you really have to be on top of it when this thing's blooming. And really all you have to do is smell for the sweet scent in the air, because you will smell that. You can smell them from blocks away. And if you notice in this picture, there's just 3 honeybees on this cluster alone. And bee people, anybody that's raising bees and has bee hives will tell you that Linden honey is regarded as some of the best. And so I'm here to tell you, you can take these flowers in this stage and dry them for later use. And they're easy to dry. I just dry them on newspapers until they're almost, until they're crispy dry. But it's amazing. You can also infuse that flower, make a tea out of it. Of course, you can have a water infusion as a tea, but you can also use the flowers to make an alcohol-based infusion too that we use during cold and flu season. So it's known worldwide, folks. It has, it's the nectar of kings, as it says here. And so it has minerals and flavonoids and tannins and volatile oils, all in a sweet package. And basically, it's the best benefit for it is cold and flu season. But one thing people also do is for skin health and hair health. So what you would do, you see, if you make an alcohol-based tincture, you can just have an eyedropper, and you take out some of that alcohol and put it in the palm of your hand, and then add a carrier oil. That carrier oil could be coconut oil, it could be olive oil, it could be almond oil, any oil that's good for your skin. And then you add that infusion to that oil, and it's great for your skin health. So basically, it is a top plant for health benefits. So it's something we all need to be seeking out. And I know my fiance Pat, she was having some serious skin issues with a rash, and we had just collected a bunch of linden flowers and dried them. So we drew her a bath to put in made a strong tea with the linden on the stove, and then added that to the bath water, and that helped alleviate the skin rash that she had big time. So it really, really works well for that. But again, its main use for herbalists is its fight against influenza, the flu, coughing. It should have been something prescribed during COVID. And if you come down with COVID and you're having some serious symptoms or whatever, make sure you can visit the local herbal place and get linden flower tea. It's really easy to acquire. You can order it online if you're not out there harvesting it. But the flowers get all the attention, but the favorite part of the linden tree might actually be the leaves, you guys. So the leaf buds, before the leaves unfurl in the spring, you can snip them off or break them off the tips of the branches and eat them just like you would anything. They taste like peas. They're sweet, and all that concentrated leaf matter, basically is very nutritious as well. But in this image, you'll see as the leaves are unfolding, and when they first unfold, they kind of have this translucent quality to them. Once they lose that translucent quality, it doesn't mean that they're not edible anymore, but they're just not as palatable. So if you're using linden leaves for a salad, and I know a lot of people that do, you would harvest them very early in the spring when they're only about 2 inches tall. The challenge is a lot of the linden branches are way up there in the air, but you might know of some that are low branched and easy to pick from. So I encourage you to try those leaves. Basically, the leaves, to me, just kind of taste green, but what does lettuce taste like, right? Until you doctor it up. So anyway, the flowers, the leaf buds, and the emerging leaves are all good on the linden. So, so that tea and the tincture is one thing. And then people like to use them for the treatment of anxiety. So it'd be like a nighttime tea before you go to bed. Maybe you're having trouble sleeping, you got a lot on your mind, or just stressed in life, and linden tea would be a good thing for you to include. Of course, during cold and flu season as well, respiratory issues. The collecting of the flowers is critical, though. You have to get them right after they open. and they don't last long. So during linden flower season, you have to be on top of it. So because they probably only last about a week at peak fragrance to get the linden for your tea. And actually, I've read the little leaf linden that I mentioned grows in Europe, commonly planted in Europe. And I know there's this one meeting place in Europe where people meet to discuss policy and whatnot. And they have, the tradition in Europe is to plant a linden tree on opposite sides of the entrance. So people come in to the meeting all calm and no anxiety. So maybe we need 2 lindens planted on the front steps of the White House or the Capitol building, right? we would have cooler heads prevailing as they're discussing policy, right? So anyway, there's your linden. Linden, and if you remember anything tonight, discover the benefits of linden. You'll be glad you did. Another one too that you need to discover is the pine and spruce tips. Early in the spring, I don't want to say too early, but usually around late April, early May, and into May, a developing spruce and pine tree will have these little bright green tips. And you can see this is a spruce with the new emerging tips, and then there's a pine tree with its new tips. So that's the new growth emerging on the spring, and you can cut those off, break them off, whatever, and dry them. And so high in nutrients, and basically used for a tea. You can make a syrup or a tea, and long been known amongst herbalists as a valuable source for vitamin C, as a winter survival food for those people that are, just trying to survive. It's like if you're stuck out in the woods and you're, abandoned for 10 days, what did people live off of? Oftentimes it was pine tea. And so maybe you've never tried it, maybe you have, but I'd encourage you to try it. Helps build your immune system. And to a certain herbalist I have on my radio show, Barbara Salvatore. Barbara, if you chime in, if you're listening, one of the best teas to drink for cold and flu season. You can also make a tincture out of it and then add a simple syrup to it to make a beautiful pine scented syrup. They're often used, again, as a remedy for respiratory ailments. So like if you have a bad cough. So anyway, the compound that is in pine tips is used to make the flu-fighting ingredient in Tamiflu. Go figure. And a lot of our flu-fighting ingredients are plant-based, right? And so anyway, you can enjoy a cup of tea and fight a cold at the same time. It also helps build your immune system. So it's just basically a good, because it's so high in vitamin C, it's a good thing to include in your diet. Easy to dry, easy for you to have on hand during the cold winter months. So I encourage you to include this in your foraging foray as you go out and about. You'll be glad you did. Yeah, thanks, Dawn, for that comment. It works, adds a lot of vitamin C. Yes, so it's a very good plant for vitamin C. Whoops, I'm getting ahead of myself. All right, but one thing I discovered and I'm making right now is this product called Mugo. And it's just fun to say. Now, with that word, you might be thinking that sounds Italian, and it is. This is a tradition in Italy, but in Italy, they use the English walnut. That's what grows over in Italy. Here in Nebraska, we have the black walnut, but also, oh, wait, I got off track here. We're talking about pine trees, Bob. In Italy, the pine tree they're using is the Mugo Pine. And Mugo Pine, we grow here in Nebraska as an ornamental. But if you ever notice the little Mugo Pine, it's a little, like a 15-foot shrub it can get, like a shrubby pine. It gets small little cones on it. And I think that's one of the reasons they like making Mugolio out of it, is because of the smaller cones. So what you do is you find a pine tree. I collected these from an Austrian pine. You can get it from Ponderosa pine, white pine, but the Austrian, they're pretty, common and abundant. But check this out, you can order Mugolio online, and that little half-ounce cup of syrup right there was $25. Ouch, right? And so it's very expensive, and it's becoming a popular thing, really 5-star restaurants. But you can make this your 5-star product at home, and believe you and me, you don't have to pay $25 for a half a cup of syrup. What you're going to have to do though, the cost of this syrup is in time. So it takes time for it to form. So you basically harvest those cones. Now's a good time, late June, where it's getting a little late. The cones are getting bigger, but you can still go out and check. Usually about 1.5 inches is what you want, but you want those tight cones. You don't want to use the cones from last year, the brown cones. You want the green cones. And believe it or not, those green cones have a boatload of water in them, in addition to the pine tree nutrients. So the same vitamin C, the same nutrients you're getting out of the pine tip tea, you're getting out of this syrup. So you basically, you want to get, if you're going to make something sweet, as the recipes online, you can type in Mugolio recipes, but basically what you're looking at are spruce tips and small cones of the Mugo Pine. So they basically mixed those two equal parts. So I mixed equal weight pine cones to equal weight sugar, and I used turbinado, good organic sugar, and it looks like this on the left when you put it in the jar at first, but literally overnight it starts, that sugar pulls out the water in those pine cones. So after about, a week or so, you're left with this, it's kind of a sugary solution down on the bottom, but all the pine cones are now suspended within a sweet, piney scented syrup. And that syrup can be really used on anything you would use syrup on. It could be drizzled over pancakes or walnuts or, fruit salad, lots of different things. But it's just a fun thing to make, and it makes great Christmas gifts. It needs to steep in there and ferment for like 30 days. And then there's recipes online. You don't have to remember all this, but then you just take it, remove it all from the jar, put it on the stove top and bring it to a boil with the cones still in it. And then you let it cool and strain out the cones, and then bring it back to a boil again and let it simmer for like 10 or 15 minutes. And then you can add it to jars and go ahead and jar it and store it for later use. So good stuff. All I know is it smells really great. Yes, you can do this with Ponderosa pine cones, Dawn. And in fact, that was going to be my pine cone of choice. I just bumped into an Austrian pine sooner. I think the Ponderosa pine cones would make an awesome Mugolio. And this dude online from Forager Chef is really one of the guys I really trust, because he does all this stuff. He's made this Mugolio out of different pine species, different spruce species, and different fir species. And he said each one embarks a unique flavor all its own, which is kind of like saying you'll never be done, right, you guys? So anyway, check that out. And then now we've got magnolia, believe it or not, the beautiful magnolia that blooms in the spring. This is called saucer magnolia, and we have them all over Lincoln. Some years the bloom is better than the other. And with this next thing, you have to be careful. Somebody's going to look at you funny if they see you pulling off the flower petals of their prized magnolia. So of course you're going to want to get permission, but you're not going to be stripping this tree of all the flowers either. You just need like a quart jar full. So basically you're pickling the magnolia flowers. And in China and Japan, it is a rite of passage of spring that people go out in the woods and collect magnolia blossoms. It's a huge thing in China, and it should be here as well. Honestly, I have not done this yet. It's on my bucket list. It sounds amazing, right? It looks like, although the end result looks like pickled oysters and malt vinegar, the flavor will convert you as soon as it hits your taste buds. So try some pickled magnolia flowers. And get this, in the wintertime, you see these fuzzy magnolia buds. So on the dormant tree, you can harvest those buds. And actually, this is a picture of me harvesting some a couple of years ago. You basically peel off that fuzzy part, and on the inside of that bud is basically all the leaves of the plant, basically wrapped up into a tight little package. So this is dormant. I picked these, I think it was February, something like that, on a nice February day. and they have a very spicy scent to them. So you can dry those and then grind them up, or just keep them in a bag and grind them up as you're using them for recipes. So you could use them like you would use cardamom or any strong spice, Middle Eastern spice like that, like cloves and camphor. So look into magnolia buds and look it up online, and how to collect them and which magnolias are good and how to use the spice. And magnolia buds could be for you. Okay, now let's talk about a few wild fruits. One of my favorite wild fruits to collect is the serviceberry. And serviceberry has a lot of names. Amelanchier is what we call it in the trade, but it's also called Juneberry. And up north in Canada, they still call them Saskatoons. And down in places like South Carolina, North Carolina, they call them Sarvisberry. So Sarvis, it's even spelled that way. You know, it sounds like a Southern accent, but they actually spell it out Sarvisberry. But to keep it simple, I'm going to call them Juneberry. That's the reason I call it Juneberries. It helps me remember it's June, and that is the time to harvest Juneberries. So we're too late for this year, folks. This is a fantastic landscape plant. If you don't have one in your yard, you should find them. There's a bush form that only gets around 6 feet tall. There's a selection out there called Regent, and Regent was actually selected up in North Dakota, and it was selected near the town of Regent, hence the name Regent Saskatoon or Regent Serviceberry. Anyway, the fruit forms in these clusters like this, and when they're red like that, they're okay, but you want them to ripen even further. And this is the point where a lot of people lose their serviceberry to the birds, because the birds love them. I mean, robins especially go crazy for them, and they can strip a tree really quickly. There's more the color you want to get of a perfectly ripened Juneberry. And they're not only delicious, but they're nutrient dense as well. They're just as nutritious as any blueberry out there. But if you know where to forage them, and what you got to do, this flower that you see there is a very early flower in the spring, usually around the time forsythias are blooming. So what I often do is I'll keep my eyes peeled as I'm driving around town for various errands or whatever, sitting at a stoplight. I'll be looking for this tree in bloom, because it's the only thing that's going to be in bloom right then with these white flowers. And that kind of tells me I need to go hit that person up to collect that fruit. So I have my honey holes, as I call them. We know where some bushes grow, and we get them by the pound. So anyway, in the fall, this plant turns a lovely fall color, kind of a brick red. There's oranges and yellows and brick reds all on the same plant. It's very, very easy to grow in the garden. Heck, even squirrels love Juneberries too. They'll eat them. My little dog loved Juneberries. I could throw a Juneberry at her like popcorn, and she just would munch them down. So to Native Americans, the fruit was highly valued, either fresh or cooked as a sauce. And I can tell you, Juneberry sauce is the bomb. So they were also dried for winter use, mixed with dried buffalo meat and fat to make pemmican. And you might think that doesn't sound very good, but it actually would be very good. So picture like, I don't know, dried meat, smoked meat that we all love, right? And then add some fat to that. And that fat adds as a binder. And then you have a very nutritious product that you can pull out for hiking or for storing it for winter use, freezing it, whatever turns you on. It was the main component for pemmican. So that's what they look like when they're all harvested. And I'll even have the little stems in there when I'm harvesting them. And then when I'm making a pie or whatever, and I pull them out of the freezer, that's when I take those little branchlets off, because they're much easier to remove when the fruit is frozen versus messing with it after you harvest it, because it's rather time consuming to take those little stinkers off there. But anyway, it's hard to describe. I think Juneberry has its own unique flavor. Some people describe it as an apple meets a blueberry. I suppose a little bit of that, but it has little edible seeds inside there too. And as you're chewing those little soft seeds, you can kind of have a little almond aftertaste, in my opinion. And the best thing to do, if you ever eat a Juneberry, don't just eat one at once. You'll say, that's okay. If you pop 8 of them in your mouth at once, or 10 or 12 or whatever, you're going to get that juicy burst in your mouth, and you're going to say, where have you been all my life? It is so good. And I think one of the best pies on the planet is Juneberry Rhubarb Pie. You think strawberry rhubarb pie is good? Wait till you try Juneberry Rhubarb Pie. My friends know me for my Juneberry Rhubarb Pie. It's been a little while since I made one. And this actually recipe came from Kay Young's book, Wild Seasons. And it is good stuff. Yeah, Mark asked, anything that can be done to discourage the birds from stripping the service berries. I know, Mark, it is very frustrating. And you're probably saying, how the heck does that guy get pounds and pounds of them? Well, I have a honey hole, and where this honey hole is, what I mean by that is there's probably a dozen trees planted, each one of them about 15 to 20 feet tall that the city planted. So I'm not going to tell you where that's at. All I know is I think there's too many for the birds to get, and plus it's near a busy roadway, so they don't feel comfortable eating there, I think, with all the traffic. Who knows? All I know is I'm able to get it. I know people that will actually cover their tree with bird netting to keep the birds off of them. I know that's easier said than done, but honestly, I don't have any quick fix answers for you to keep the birds off. Unfortunately, I guess if the birds get all your fruit, you just can say, well, I'm doing good for wildlife. And I guess, that's something too. So typically what I do when I'm collecting Juneberries, I'll bring out a big blanket and I'll set it at the base of the tree so I don't have to put my berries in a bag. I'm just tossing them towards this blanket. And you can get a whole lot of Juneberries. We actually collected 20 pounds one year to make wine, and the wine turned out pretty good. And up north in Canada and places like North Dakota, I think there's a restaurant in North Dakota called the Juneberry Patch or something like that. So it's a huge deal the further north you go. And I would like to see it become a huge deal here in Nebraska as well. So you can see here, it's made into all sorts of things. And the fruit does dry very well. Hence it's used for pemmican, but you can also dry it and use it for your own homemade trail mixes. So good stuff. The Juneberry, life without Juneberry is akin to life without music and art. So you've got to get some. But then if you come up with a good way to discourage birds, Mark, please share it with the rest of us, because we stand to be millionaires if we figure out how to do that. Okay, I can't leave out mulberries for wild edible fruit. I think this is one of the first things we all foraged, right? From the time we were little kids and got stained hands. And if you were barefoot, you had stained feet too. You remember those days. But maybe one thing you didn't know is just how healthy mulberries are. They're loaded with vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and a rich source of vitamin C too. Just if you snack on 1 cup of mulberries, you're getting 51 milligrams of vitamin C in your diet that day. They also have phenolic acids, and they can play a role in everything from cancer prevention to diabetes management. And you can see the dark purple, almost pretty much black fruit, indicating its high antioxidant nature. So mulberries are very watery, as you know, and eating them fresh, you're probably thinking, yeah, but what good would a mulberry be? Maybe you've made mulberry pie, maybe you haven't, but I can tell you, you need to make a mulberry pie. For one, they're easy to collect. And as you collect them, if you don't get it all collected that night, usually for a pie, you need around 4 cups of fruit, depending on the recipe. And mulberries are also very good mixed with rhubarb, making a rhubarb mulberry pie, but a straight up mulberry pie is awesome. And you may be thinking, when you pick a mulberry, they have those little green stems at the end, right? Do I have to remove those little green stems? No, you don't. They pretty much disappear when you make the pie. But I'm telling you, the pie is amazing. Let's see, we have another question. We had a tree in our backyard growing up. Great after school snack. You betcha, Deborah. That I agree. It was always a great, one thing Kay Young says in her books, not all mulberries are created equal. So snack around, because some of them are more flavorful than others. And you need to check that out. Let's see. Yeah, Dawn says she used to pick mulberries as a child and make jelly. I agree, Dawn. I thought the jelly wouldn't be as good because they're so watery when you eat them fresh. But if you want that concentrated, beautiful mulberry flavor, try making mulberry jelly or jam. Beautiful jelly anyway, regardless. But yeah, we have black mulberries and we also have white mulberries. You may know that too, folks. Let's see. Yeah, so a beautiful color. Okay, so now let's move on from mulberries to buffalo currant. The buffalo currant is related to gooseberries, and I didn't put wild gooseberries in this talk because I thought, well, let's promote the buffalo currant because it's not as common, and it should be. Yeah, Dawn asked, which mulberry is native to the state? Great question, Dawn. The mulberry that I showed you in this picture, this guy, black mulberry, was brought over from across the pond. So it was brought over by Europeans, probably because they knew it was so good for you. So all the mulberries you see, the road ditch mulberries, the mulberries that are, you know, on the edges of trails and everywhere in Nebraska, those were all introduced. But if you go to the extreme southeastern corner of the state, Richardson County, Nemaha County, think Indian Cave State Park, Wabaunsee State Park. I've seen our native red mulberry in both of those, and I should have included a picture of that. But anyway, our native one is called the red mulberry, and it's not as easy to find. It's a pretty rare tree in Nebraska, and if I just go collect seed from the red mulberry, it's already been hybridized from the black one. So anyway, so unfortunately, it's not common, the red mulberry, but great question nonetheless. Okay, let's see. Yes. Oh, and then also commented on the buffalo currant. Can we use mulberry for silkworms? Yes, I think that was one of the main reasons it was brought around the world, for using it for silkworms to produce silk. But I'm going to have to plead ignorant on that. I haven't looked into it a whole lot to see, is this something you can do at home? Boy, I don't know. That one I don't know. Okay, and then let's see. Yeah, white mulberry for silkworms. Yep, you're right. Yep, exactly, Don. Not our native one. Okay, so yeah, the buffalo currant. Another name for buffalo currant is clove currant. I think buffalo currant's a little sexier name. That's why I call it that. Clove currant, though, the beauty of the clove currant is in the flower in the spring. When it's blooming in the spring, and I'll show a picture of it here, I got right there. Yeah, so the clove currant, buffalo currant, same thing. So early in the spring, around forsythia time, you'll get these little yellow flowers on your clove currant, and you can smell them a block away. If the wind's right, it's a spicy, sweet scent, a really nice scent that rivals lilacs. And depending on where you're at, Western Nebraska, they get much better fall color on the clove currant than we do. But you can see it can get a pretty red in the fall. But let's back up here. I think the fruit is just beautiful. In fact, they're ripening right now. I go out nightly to go pick from my 1 or 2 buffalo currants I have at home, because the fruit doesn't all ripen at once. So you basically want to harvest it. And then what I'll do is I'll harvest maybe a half a cup, put that in the freezer. And then as I'm adding to that, I just pull that out of the freezer and add new ones to it until I get a decent enough harvest. But it's worth growing. Yeah, I love that. Much better scent than lilacs. And that black fruit is the bomb. I've made a wild berry pie before, and the wild berry pie was a triple pie. It was equal parts buffalo currant, mulberry, and Juneberry. And I'm telling you, that pie was 5-star, the bomb. And not available in stores. That's a beautiful of wild crafting, you guys, is you're not going to find this stuff in stores. It's not survival food, it's delicious food. So if you've never popped a ripe black currant into your mouth, you're missing out. They're tangy yet sweet. And of course, you can make that into like a buffalo currant chutney or a sauce, if you will, that's kind of like a loose jam, if you will, right? No pectin added. And then you can spoon that over some mascarpone or some yogurt. Of course, it makes a dynamite pie. Or I think one of its best uses online that they talk about is for a cobbler or for a pound cake. Black currant pound cake, oh my. So hopefully you've had dessert already. Yeah, and as Dawn says, great trail food. That's right. So you can dry them and use them for trail food because they're rich in antioxidants as well. There is a selection out there, if you can find it, called Crandall. That's Crandall. Crandall was actually selected in Kansas. I mean, I want to say it was like the late 1800s, and it's basically disappeared from the trade. So we all need to bring that back, and how we bring that back is asking for it at your garden center, because we're the ones that create the demand. So clove currant, buffalo currant, an awesome plant for you to seek out. And that's kind of what it looks like when it's in all of its glory, maybe about a 3 to 4 by 3 to 4 foot shrub with those wonderful blossoms in the spring. So there you see them kind of growing clusters, and you can see what I mean. These dark black ones are ready to harvest, but this one that still has quite a bit of red in it, I would save that for a day or two to get to this black stage, because it can be very tart at this stage. Not saying you can't collect them, but they're much, they've got all the full nutrients and whatnot with that dark black fruit. Heck yeah. So anyway, now this one, we have a friend that has a nice row of wild black raspberry, and black raspberries are just amazing fruits. Out of all the raspberries you can grow, and maybe you've grown raspberries before and you know how aggressive they are. Well, the black raspberry is like super aggressive. So you just have to make sure you plant it in what we refer to as a rock and a hard place. This friend of mine has his along a chain link fence, and then between his chain link fence and a driveway, it's only about a 3 foot space of soil. That's where he planted his blackberries, and he lets them kind of lean up against his fence, and then any that want to grow off in the driveway, he just prunes away. So he keeps them confined so they have nowhere to run, because they will spread underground and can become a nuisance. Another friend I have, he keeps his confined by, he basically has a 10-foot circle, and then that circle is surrounded by mowed grass. So the plant has nowhere to spread to. It occupies that circle, and it's kept at bay by mowing around it all the time. But what makes a raspberry versus a blackberry, right? They look like little blackberries, don't they? But raspberries are distinguished from blackberries. You see that little hollow part in there? So you basically, when you pull the fruit off, it leaves a hollow cone in the middle. There you can kind of see that cone that's remaining on the plant as you pluck a black raspberry. If you pluck a blackberry, the whole fruit comes off whole, as you probably know, right? So that's the main difference. But they're amazing plants. And yeah, I agree. Black raspberries have a much sweeter, fuller flavor than blackberries. Blackberries to me are almost like, I don't know. When I eat a fresh blackberry, I'm like, what's the big hubbubaloo? I don't think they're that great, but I don't live in Kentucky either, where I can harvest them like to the abandon, right? But anyway, they are a super food that is for full show. I mean, one of the highest, their ORAC level, a measure of their antioxidant power, is about 3 times higher than blueberries. And if you look up the ORAC level, the king is pretty much aronia berries. Aronia, or the black chokeberry, is also called. If you know aronia berry, you know it's regarded as a superfood. Well, right under aronia berry for its antioxidant power is the black raspberry. So rich in vitamin A, C, E, folic acid, just on. And I like including all those names so you know they have studied this fruit and found all these great compounds in it. The king of berries, in my opinion. But again, it's not very common. You can't go to the store and buy black raspberries. And why is that? Because it's such a perishable item. You know how perishable the red raspberry is and how expensive they are because they're so perishable. Black raspberries, they'd have to charge even more. So I encourage you to find them online, order them, and grow them in your yard. We don't offer them at the statewide Arboretum, but maybe I should look into that. I just don't want somebody coming back in 5 years and yelling at me because it was so aggressive and took over their yard. So they do come with a precaution on how aggressive they are. And the leaves can be made into a tea, but we won't go into that right now. Anyway, chokecherry. You know, everybody knows chokecherry, but I tell you what, folks, we can drive around the countryside now and chokecherries are rare in the road ditches. Wild plum in another 20 to 30 years, my theory is wild plum is going to be rare in our road ditches because we need another 7 rows of corn. We need another 7 rows of soybeans. Oftentimes, the road ditches that used to inhabit chokecherry and wild plum, those stands are being eliminated. So I think we all need to be looking at the chokecherry, but not so much as a wild crafted edible, but something you're growing right in your backyard. But this one too comes with a warning. It's suckers. And so it needs to be planted in between a rock and a hard place. But again, as I mentioned earlier with the black raspberry, you can plant it and surround it by mowed grass so that chokecherry just occupies that one zone, maybe a 6 by 6 foot mulch bed that's mowed all the way around it, and let that chokecherry rule in that 6 foot spacing, and it will. And then you'll keep it confined. But just know the birds love the fruit too. And because the birds love the fruit, that's right, they're going to drop the seeds wherever they want, meaning it can become kind of a little stinker when it seeds around too much in your yard. Yes, okay, so yeah, here's a comment. I have a chokecherry hedge at the east end of my garden. It does sucker, so plant it where you can mow it off. And would you say then that mowing it off keeps it at bay, Dawn, or are you seeing where you're mowing kind of a tough little stem that you wouldn't want to walk barefoot in that area because those little stems are pokey, or does that matter? I'm just curious if you've seen that, or walking barefoot around your chokecherry, if you're like going, that was a no-no. But chokecherries have a beautiful flower in the spring, and pollinators love this plant. So it's an important plant for pollinators early in the spring. Yeah, no bare feet, and it will come back. Pull it if you can. I love it. All right, very good. Yeah, so you will get the little twigs up there and in your grass, but mowing it off, pulling it, definitely keeps it at bay. And I would hope Don would say it's worth growing. I don't care. I'm going to grow it anyway, and I'm going to keep it at bay. So here's what chokecherry looks like as it's ripening. They go from this red to this dark, almost a reddish purple color. But the birds will start taking them when they're this red. So you really have to keep your eye on them, or the birds will beat you to that harvest. They beat me to my harvest every year. I must say, I'm chasing robins out every year when I'm trying to get chokecherries. But chokecherries are so good. All right, so I love it. Yeah, and Sherry commented, this is very true. The last year, the farmers in my Washington County area have bulldozed down all the trees along their fields. So it's a huge issue, you guys. And, you know, I don't know if I'm crazy saying this, but I think wild plum is going to be a rare plant in about 20 to 30 years, which is pretty sad to say. So it's us gardeners to say, well, I don't want to plant a wild plum. I don't have room. Or I don't want to plant a chokecherry. I don't have room. Well, I think if we want to help shore up our nation's biodiversity, we have to be thinking of these things, because chokecherry feeds a lot of different songbirds out there. And then a lot of different larval stages of butterflies and moths will feed on the chokecherry. If you look at these leaves up close, they have lots of little holes in them and blemishes, but you can't really see it from a distance. So they're not going to eat all of the chokecherry, but they're going to take a little bit here and there. So very important, incredibly important shrub. In fact, it was such an important shrub to the Dakota, they named a whole month after it. To Native Americans, plants were our plant calendar, and they called the month of, I think it was the month of July, Black Cherry Moon. So chokecherry season is July, so be checking on them. If you know where to go hunt for them, more power to you. But I'm telling you, you could drive around the countryside all day long and good luck finding one. So afraid of the Dakota, they call it Wasana, and that's what they also made pemmican out of, just like they did with the Juneberries. And also using it as the plant calendar, the time of the Sundance, which is a very important time for the Lakota, began the first day of the full moon when cherries were ripe. So they literally used the chokecherry as their signal that time to start the Sundance. So of course, today we use them in jellies and sauces. They make a great wine, a pie, and a syrup. And the pie, you might be wondering, I think Kay Young's got a recipe. She calls it the 30-minute pie, and meaning she keeps the seeds and everything in there. You just have to kind of work the seeds around and then spit the seeds out. I've never made chokecherry pie before for that reason. But what I do make out of it is a syrup or a sauce or a jelly. And as you know, if you've had chokecherry jelly, it has its own unique musky scent to it. But what I've done is making a chokecherry syrup, which is basically a jelly that didn't set, right? So you take that syrup and you make what's called a chokecherry fizz. So you combine maybe a tablespoon of that syrup to ginger ale, and the syrup is heavy enough where it sinks to the bottom of that ginger ale, and now you have that nice effervescent ginger ale. It's kind of a two-tone color. The bottom half of your glass is that pretty purple color, and then the upper part, of course, more the plain color of ginger ale. So a chokecherry fizz, if you haven't tried it, it's the bomb. And of course, you can make it an alcohol-based drink too if you want to, and add vodka to it, whatever turns you on. But chokecherry fizz for the kids, they will drink it up. Much better than a Pepsi or a Coke. There's what the fruit looks like after one of my harvests, all ready to go into the freezer. I just freeze them and say, I'm going to get to you later. That's how I deal with all these wild edible fruits, is I'll freeze them because I have much more time in January and February, and it's nothing more fun than to pull out a frozen bag of fruit and process it during a blizzard in February. That's kind of a fun thing to do. Okay, looks like we got one other comment. Oh, chokecherry kombucha. Yeah, that does sound yummy. That I have not tried. Thanks for that tip there, Mikey. I love that. Okay, bucket list material right there. Okay, now let's move on to our other beautiful shrub for Nebraska, and that is the wild plum. Love the wild plum. And the wild plum, as I mentioned, is getting more and more rare in Nebraska, but I think what is also becoming rare for me when I go out and try to collect wild plum, I swear there will be a fruit harvest 1 in 5 years, 1 in 7 years, 1 in 10 years. Rarely can I find a wild plum thicket nowadays that has fruit on it. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. The only thing I can guess is that when wild plums are blooming, it's very early in the spring. So when that wild plum is in full bloom, we might have too cold of a night for it that takes the flowers out. And of course, consequently takes the fruit out as well. And I think the wild plums, paying attention this year, I think they made it through their full bloom without it freezing. Another thing that concerns me is when the wild plums are in bloom, that's often the spray season for our agronomic crops. So are the wild plum flowers and fruit development being affected by drift and overspray? I have a feeling that has a lot to do with it. Yeah, and as Dawn says, I have thickets to the west of my house. We often lose the flowers to freeze or lose fruit to hail. Oh boy, isn't that the case, Dawn? I hear you. So it's like when you do actually get a harvest, I guess we should dance and sing its praises, because it might be years before you get another harvest. So anyway, the fruit was also highly valued and was eaten either fresh or cooked as a sauce. And if you've ever had wild plum sauce, it is the bomb. And they also dry very well for winter use. So picture the dried plums that you've had, from the store. The wild plum dried beats anything you've ever had in the store. So yeah, good stuff. And then it was also used for a plant calendar. The Omaha planted their corn, beans, and squashes when the wild plums came into bloom. And if you think about it, what I just mentioned earlier is when wild plum is in bloom, that's often spray season. So not only are we planting during that time, but we're also spraying. Usually nowadays it's a knockdown chemical to take out the henbit and whatnot, the cool season plants, so that before they even plant the corn. So that wasn't something that was around when I was growing up. We often cultivated those fields, but now that cultivation is kind of restricted for no-till farming. No-till, you won't be able to get your insurance payment, your payment from the federal government unless you do no-till. But what that no-till has led to is an abundance of weeds, and these weeds are becoming resistant to chemicals. So farmers are having to spray more. And I think we need to relook at that whole no-till approach. And, because if we continue on the same trajectory, I don't see it getting much better. So the Native Americans called August the red plum moon. So you have the black cherry moon in July, and August is red plum moon. But I just think that's cool that they named a whole month after a single plant. Yeah. How do you know when they're ready? Just like you would like test a ripe avocado or a ripe mango. If you give them a little squeeze, they have some give to it. In other words, I've been burned before where the plum looks ripe. So I go ahead and harvest a bunch, and then they just weren't quite ripe enough. It didn't lead to a very good product. Yeah. So yeah, and as you can see here, the ripened fruit still warmed by the sun, yet untouched by decay to be picked from the ground. I've definitely picked wild plums off the ground. Of course, wash them well. And of course, if the wild plums are dropping somewhere where you're worried about either chemicals or cows running around, anything like that, sure, that's different. But most of the time you're safe getting those off the ground. And maybe you didn't know this, it boasts one of the highest food values, 20% carbohydrate content, more than any other fruit. I think that's pretty cool. Yes, I agree. When ripe, they come off in your hand at a simple touch. If you have to pull them off, they're not ready. That's another good way to tell if you're too early for the wild plum harvest. And if you are too early, if you have to pull them off, just give it a day or two. You'll be surprised what a day or two will give you, especially if it's warm and sunny out, ripening them well. But wild plum wine we've made before. It is really good, I think. Wild plum pie. This is some wild plum jelly I've made in the past. I think it's one of the best jellies I've ever made, and the color is just beautiful. So wild plums, don't forget about them. Okay. Now let's move on to this next one, the American elderberry. Now the elderberry just finished blooming. Maybe you have a few more blooms on some, but those flowers, those huge flower clusters, and oftentimes if you have an elderberry, you have enough to harvest both the flower and then harvesting the fruit later. So you're basically taking that cluster of flower and you can take it and dip it in batter and fry it, while the petals can also be eaten raw or made into a fragrant and tasty tea. From what I understand, the entire flower cluster was dipped into hot water to make a tea. But for our purposes, I simply remove the flowers, like these flowers here that you see there. I'll cut them off with the scissors and let them dry on a newspaper. And then the flowers easily separate from the green stems, and they'll turn brown. So don't let that scare you. I mean, it's not the prettiest looking thing because they went from white to brown, but they're so versatile once you dry them and use them, and they're chock full of nutrients. And in Europe, they call it. Okay, that's great. The elders are now just blooming in northwestern Nebraska. So northwestern Nebraska and northern parts of the state, you're about 2 to 3 weeks later than we are here in Lincoln, southeastern Nebraska. So good point. You're definitely not too late. So look up harvesting and using elderberry flowers. You'll be glad you did. And what we made at home was I don't have a picture of it, but elder cordial, and I should have taken a picture of it. Elder cordial is just using dried elder flowers, like a 1/4 cup, if I remember right. And then you use the juice of 1 lemon, 1 lime, and 1 orange. So after you juice it into that mixture, you just throw the whole lemon, lime, and orange right into the batch. And then you make a simple syrup. And a simple syrup is simply equal parts sugar and water. And then you add that to that juice mixture and let it steep in the refrigerator for like 3 days. I think if I remember right, you're supposed to shake it in the morning and then shake it again in the afternoon to help get the goodies out of it. But after 3 days, you strain that mixture, and what you're left with is this beautiful golden colored syrup. And it's sweet, almost overly sweet in my opinion, but it's very sweet, but it's also very citrusy. So what I like using that for is the base for a libation, or the base for, adding it to a little lemonade or some ginger ale again. But one of my favorite things to do with that cordial is to spoon it over a fruit salad or fresh fruit. Maybe you're cutting up fruit for your Sunday breakfast, and maybe you're having some strawberries and some bananas, blueberries, whatever turns you on. You spoon a two or three tablespoons of that elder cordial over it, and you're eating 5-star. So let's see. Okay, so yeah, there's the elder flower, and or the elder fruit. Another thing I didn't show a picture of, I don't think. Let's see if I did. Oh, there we go. There's the white flowers that can be harvested and make elder tea and elderflower cordial. It's a fun thing to harvest and put in your little basket. And there's the elderflower tea that you can see. You can make it fresh or use the dried flowers. And that's what the little flowers look like up close. But right now here in Lincoln area is what the elderberries look like. They look like this. They aren't ripe yet. They're in this green stage, but this is on my bucket list, and now would be the time for me to do it. But you can basically just pick those little green fruits off of it, the developing raw elderberries. You don't want to eat them raw. You want to process them first, because the seeds of an elderberry, I can't remember what the chemical is, but it's not good for us. You don't want to eat elderberries raw. You want to process them, cook them, and that basically renders that compound useless. So basically you can make foragers' capers. You take these little berries and then make a vinegar recipe. So 1 cup of green elderberries, some water, some salt, some vinegar, and sugar, and pickle it. And if you've ever bought capers, I'm a big fan of capers in the store, but they're mighty expensive. You can make your own homemade capers using unripened elderberries. Go figure, huh? So now I want to back up. Sorry about this. So there's elderberry wine, probably the most popular use of elderberries, and it makes a fantastic wine. I love elderberry jelly. That's good stuff. And for flu prevention, it's becoming very well known for its flu prevention, you guys. I mean, it's a great medicine. In fact, I'm even starting to see advertisements for elder. They're calling it something else, Big Pharma is, but don't let Big Pharma get a hold of this one. Do it yourself. So you can make an elixir for cold and flu prevention. So an elixir is sweetened with honey. So in other words, if you want to keep your kids' immune system built up for the school time, because as you know, with school, they're bringing everything home, right? I used to catch all my kids' colds, but sinus infections, sore throats, common colds, stomach aches, elderberry is king. And here you see elderberry gin. So this is just elderberry fruits that are infused in gin. That's also very tasty. You can also dry the berries for later use, but we often just freeze ours because it's just easy to do. And there's an elderberry syrup mixed with a cheesecake. Is that not beautiful? Elderberry syrup cheesecake, my, oh my. So that should be on your bucket list. Okay, so elderberries should be in everybody's yard. A lot of people want to attract pollinating insects. And a lot of people want to help wildlife. Plant an elderberry because, first of all, the flowers, a myriad of insects go after the flowers, and I'm convinced they're going after it because they're also getting the same health benefits we are. And through research, they've recognized a lot of interesting things, like 33 different species of songbirds eat elderberry fruits. And that's one of the reasons, if you have an elderberry, you see them coming up all over your yard because the birds are, dropping them all over your yard. And that's, yeah, I see that. I had a bird plant one. Yeah, that's typically what happens. You'll just have one show up in your yard because the birds just go crazy for them. So it's another one you have to keep on top of to beat the birds to the harvest. But just know that elderberry shrub is big, and there's enough to go around for everybody. There's enough for you, the birds, and the bees. So you betcha. Let's see. I'm just kind of reading. Oh, I see. That's funny. Somebody said that cheesecake looks like to die for, and he's just like, I'm allergic to dairy, but what a way to go. That's cool. All right. So yeah, nothing prettier than a ripe cluster of elderberries with huge fruits on them. Good stuff, Maynard. Love the flowers, love the fruit. And I'm not going to include much on this in this talk, but you could Google elderberry leaves for medicinal use. The leaves are actually used for skin treatments, you guys. I just haven't done it yet. It's on my bucket list, but I encourage you to look it up, because if you have an elderberry, it's got lots of leaves. And then the shaft of an elderberry, the stems, if you ever cut them back, the stems have a very pithy interior. So those of you making bee hotels or homemade bee hotels, so you're not having to go buy one, you can make your own. Just cut those stems into 8-inch pieces, and then the bees will come and hollow it out and use it for nest, especially like your mason bees and your miner bees. So that's awesome. Okay. Yeah, so there you go with their nutrients. They're just full of nutrients, and any dark purple fruit to black fruit like that, you know, is good for you. And elderberry is one of the best. Okay, now let's move on to wild grape. Oh man, did I mention this is a fast hour? Okay, I'm going to quickly just show you some pictures. Brianna, do you want me to try to go on, or what?
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm gonna throw the poll out, and if you guys have to leave early, definitely leave when you need to, but otherwise keep going if you guys are enjoying it. I was gonna say when it hit the 40-minute mark, I was just blown away. It's just too good. So
There's
yeah,
just too much. There's just too much to talk about. Yeah. So, well, anyway, I'll try to keep going, you guys, and I won't comment too much on it, so I can go get through all these and we can go fast. Okay, did you know we have wild grapes in Nebraska? Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but a lot of the wild grapes we see in Nebraska are male plants. They don't have any fruit on them. So if you're lucky enough to bump into a wild grape, there you see my hand, you see just how small the grapes are. So they're teeny little guys, but my oh my, are they packed with flavor. If you ate one fresh, it's certainly not as good as eating a store-bought grape. They're sour, but full of flavor. And I'm telling you, wild grape jelly, if you see somebody offering that for sale at some of the farmers markets, and you're thinking they're offering or they're charging too much, say to yourself, I don't care, it's worth it. And the only reason I was able to make, well, we made a gallon of wine out of it, so we got quite a bit. Wild grape wine is the bomb too. And that was because a friend told me that they bumped into some wild grapes down in a certain area of Lincoln. And I was like, are you sure they're wild grapes? He said, yeah, I know they were. So we went down there based on where he went. Of course, he didn't want to go harvest them. So he said, help yourself. So we went down there, and this is what we discovered. So we scored a whole bunch of them. Okay, quickly, we'll go through shrubs. And this one is, if you remember anything today, try to remember the sumac and how important the sumac is to us. We all know the sumac for its beautiful fall color in our road ditches, but it becomes an important food in the wintertime for birds. And right now the sumac is blooming. That picture to the left is a sumac cluster in bloom. So if you look closely, each one of those little spots on there is a flower. So that whole cluster probably has 300 flowers on it, something like that. So if you go visit a sumac patch when it's in full bloom, it'll be buzzing with bee activity. They go crazy for it. So if nothing else, plant sumac for pollinators. Who would have thunk it? But later on in the fall, you get that beautiful red head on it. And this is the time to harvest it, when the head is red and the leaves are still green. If you wait until the leaves have turned that beautiful red fall color, you're not too late, but it doesn't have the same je ne sais quoi as a full ripened one. I could run my hand up this cluster that you see here and look at my hand would be wet with all the juice. And no, it's not dew. No, it's not after a rain. The plant just has that much juice in it. Running my hand up it, I couldn't believe all the juice on it. So of course I gave it a little taste, and it tasted like Sour Patch Kids or lemon on steroids. It's in the citrus family, believe it or not. And so it's very citrusy. And for centuries, probably hundreds and hundreds of years, Native Americans have made sumac aid, or is what we call it, or Sumacade is what it's also referred to. So basically like lemonade, you're just steeping it in water and makes a very refreshing beverage. If you've never made Sumacade before, make this the year. And you might be asking, well, what about poison sumac, Bob? Don't I have to be worried about that? No, poison sumac is not in Nebraska. Poison sumac does not grow here. So you will not find it in Nebraska. It's not hardy enough. It's more of a southeastern US species. So no worries, sumacs are not poisonous, okay? And you basically you can just soak the berries, but oftentimes they'll recommend you kind of crush the berries first. You can put them in a big mortar and pestle. And my Pat and I have made sumac wine before. So we needed a whole lot of berries, you guys. And what we used is we sterilized the end of a 4x4, put all the berries in a 5-gallon bucket, and we just pounded those berries with that 4x4 until we could see all the juice kind of coming out. And then we just mixed the water, the sugar, and the yeast to make our wine. But making a Sumacade for a refreshing summer drink, you'll be glad you did. So there's good recipes online. You don't have to worry about writing this stuff down. Just Google Sumacade recipes, and you'll see that it's something that you need to be making. And I think the good thing about this is it's not just tasty, but it's also excellent. I think it's very high in vitamin C, if I remember right. I can't quite remember. Yeah, why not stomp a lot like grapes? Well, Mikey, I think the stomping, sure, you could do that, but the berries don't have a whole lot of juice in them. I think it's not going to be as easily stomped. Sure, you could do it, but it's not going to be as easily stomped as grapes. You know, it's not as mushy and whatnot as grapes. The sumac can also be dried, you guys. So zatar, maybe you heard of. Sumac, there's a Chinese species that grows over in China and India, and that's where that spice comes from. The bright lemony flavor is a perfect match for the earthy flavor of thyme, sea salt, and toasted sesame seeds. So you can basically dry the berries or collect them a little later in the year when they are dry, and grind them up and mix them with and make a herb spice blend. Or just look up zatar recipe blends, and you'll see where sumac comes in. And if nothing else, just sample a few berries this fall. If you come across a sumac and you said, I remember that nerd Bob told us about Sumacade, I don't have time to mess with it, whatever the case may be, pluck off a few of those berries, pop it in your mouth and kind of chew on it. And man, will it get your salivary glands going. It's a tart pop, and good stuff. The largest native fruit in North America comes from the pawpaw, and the pawpaw grows naturally in southeast Nebraska. And there's some pictures of some fruit from my tree at home. They have these cool chocolate brown flowers in the spring, and they emerge so early, a lot of our pollinators aren't out yet. They say that the pawpaw gets pollinated by flies. And so and they also say you need more than 2, or you need at least 2 trees for cross-pollination. That's not necessarily true. I have a single pawpaw. It does get fruit on it. It's just not as abundant as it's going to be if you planted more than 1 pawpaw. So I like to say plant them in groves. That's the way to treat a pawpaw, is by planting them in groves. You can literally plant 6 trees about 6 feet apart and let them all grow up as one unit. Then you're going to get that cross-pollination. So it's smooth, custardy, often compared to a banana, but people say it's like a banana meets a mango meets a pineapple. It's just a very tropical flavor. And I think it has its own unique flavor where, you know, I've had people say, I just don't like them. They're almost too sweet for some people. But I think one of the best uses for them is pawpaw bread, much like you would use an overripe banana for banana bread. Pawpaw bread is really good, but I think one of the best uses is taking that pulp and then freezing it and then pulling it out in the wintertime and using it in smoothies or making muffins out of it. It's so good, and it's so good for you. So there's my pawpaws to the right, harvested, and when they're turning yellow like that, they're perfect, and they have just a little give to them. They're not mushy, but yet just a little give, like a ripe mango. And because if you harvest them and try to eat them when they're overripe, you're going to have problems. And in fact, I've heard that Lewis and Clark, when they were coming through the Missouri, were fed pawpaws by the Indians. and the men on the crew, after they left, thought they had dysentery. I have a feeling the Indians fed them overripe pawpaws on purpose. Just saying. It's like, good luck on your trip as you head up north. Well, anyway, that's what the pulp looks like before you freeze it. And there's big seeds in there, and I don't bother to fish the seeds out until later after I freeze it. You can make pawpaw sorbet. This is actually at a party we had. A friend made this pawpaw sorbet that was good. I've made pawpaw panna cotta. There's a recipe online for that. Very easy to make and a great use of pawpaw. The pawpaw panna cotta I made a raspberry syrup that can kind of go over the whole thing, because the raspberry is a little tart that really contrasts well with that sweet pawpaw. There's pawpaw bread, pawpaw ice cream. I've actually brought pawpaws to the UNL dairy store, but I never heard back from them on whether or not their ice cream making was successful or not. So I need to pay them a visit and say, what did you do with those pawpaws? Oh, we're getting lots of chat activity, I see. Okay, now I'm going to quickly try to fly. We got persimmons. Persimmons are not native to Nebraska, but close. They're Missouri, Arkansas. We can grow them really well here. Diospyros, the scientific name, means fruit of the gods. Reportedly, the sweetest fruit we can put in our mouths next to the date palm. And last time I checked, we can't grow dates here, but we can grow persimmons. And persimmons, when they're at this stage and you eat them, they're going to give you that pucker power, like the dry pasties in your mouth. You actually want them to have some light freezes on them. Usually I'm harvesting my persimmons in November, believe it or not. I've actually harvested persimmons when it's 11 degrees out. I don't recommend that. It wasn't that much fun, but I had to get my persimmons and they were still in fine shape at 11 degrees. They weren't freezing. That's because of all that sugar content in them. So here's what the persimmons look like on a plate. And then I put them in this colander here and then just put my pestle around the colander and all the stuff comes through the little holes, and I'm left with this beautiful pulp after. And that's what you use that pulp for in your recipes. This is like a bread pudding I make, and I'm known for my my persimmon bread. And there's good recipes online for persimmon bread pudding. This is a tradition down south for Thanksgiving. So even though I'm not a Southerner, I thought, by golly, I'm going to make persimmon pudding for Thanksgiving. It is so good, you guys. It's almost like, it tastes like dates, a lot like dates. They have their own unique flavor. But anyway, think of persimmons. Now we'll quickly fry through some nuts. The hickory nuts, shagbark hickory we can grow here. This one's native to Nebraska, Indian Cave State Park, noted for its shaggy bark like that. And we actually have hickory trees growing here on UNL campus. These are another species called shellbark hickory or king nut. I rather call it king nut hickory because in my mind it is the king of nuts. There it is in the fall color. And there's a former student intern looking up at the largest one we know of in the state. This is the little town of Alvo. On the southern end of town is this single tree growing. Who knows why it was planted, but it basically tells us, can we grow shellbark hickory in Nebraska? I think this tree would raise his hand and say, yes, you can. And there's the big nuts. That's my hand there for scale. You can see the size of that nut. So the nut comes inside this woody husk. And then that husk, as it ripens, splits open on its own. And then you just peel those outer wooden husks off. And then here's the nut inside. Very hard nut. It will make most nutcrackers run and hide. I use a hammer to get mine, and works pretty slick. And there's all sorts of, if you just Google easier ways to crack hickory nuts, because everybody's trying to figure out easy ways to crack hickory nuts. There's lots of cool information out there on it. But those husks, I actually save. These are very woody, and those husks can be used to smoke meat or smoke jalapenos, to make ancho chilies, whatever turns you on. Save those husks. And I think when I stick my nose in that handful of stuff, to me, it smells like a fine furniture store. It's so good. So the bark can also be used. This is syrup made out of the bark, believe it or not. So last winter, I went and collected the bark, the shaggy bark, not going to hurt the tree at all by peeling that bark off the outside of the tree. Basically boiled it in water for a long time and strained it and then made this fancy looking syrup. I can tell you the syrup is really mild. To do it over again, I probably would have either added more bark or boil it for a longer time to get a stronger flavored syrup because it's so mild. But when I crack the nuts, oftentimes I have little end pieces like that still have a little bit of nut meat in them, but it's not worth picking out those little pieces. Well, I found out those won't go to waste. You can make hickory nut syrup with the leftover hickory shells after you crack them, even if it doesn't have nut meat in them. And we did this last winter, and I can tell you, this syrup is the bomb. Much better than, well, I love pure maple syrup, but that store-bought stuff with the corn syrup in it, I'm telling you what, and I included this image here because you can actually order hickory syrup online, but then you're going to see the sticker shock and go, I think I'll just make it myself. But it is a great product, more common down in the southeastern United States because hickory is king in the southeastern United States. Think Ozarks, there's just hickories all over the place. So people have been wildcrafting with hickories for a long, long time. I could talk about hickory for a long time with you people, but my favorite is hickory pie. People have had my hickory pie before, and I'm telling you, it's 5-star, and I've never been to a restaurant that offers hickory pie before. Maybe you have. If you have, I'll shake your hand because it's pretty rare. So hickory should be grown here. Another thing I do with the hickories, I have some steeping right now. This is hickory with a good bourbon. So I make, I roast the hickory nuts first in the oven, about 220 degrees for 30 minutes. They have that nice smoky roasted flavor, and then add a half a jar of the nuts and then fill it up with some good bourbon. And does it make some great infused bourbon. Now, pecans, this is a tree growing here on East Campus, one of my favorite trees on East Campus. This is just west of the dairy store. If you want to come and look at this tree, if you're in Lincoln. And this is the largest tree growing in the state there with that human there for scale. That's down in Brownville, Nebraska, if you know where Brownville is along the Missouri. So pecans grow well here. And I think it's a beautiful tree, and it should be used as a shade tree more often. There's the beautiful foliage. And there's what it looks like when a pecan, so there's the flowers of the pecan on the right, and then here's one actually falling out of the husk. So as they ripen, this thin husk splits and the fruit draws out. And you may remember the hickory had a very thick woody husk. This one's very thin. So I have not used that for smoking meat, but you sure can. But there's some nice looking northern pecan. They look a little bit different than the pecan you get in the store. The pecans we grow here in Nebraska have a higher oil content. And that oil content for us humans means it's more nutritious, the good oils that we get in our nuts. And the oil is higher the further north you go, because to the plant, that oil is kind of an antifreeze. It keeps the developing fruit from freezing when we get those, a 32-degree night and the fruit's not quite developed yet. It kind of helps the fruit overcome those chilly conditions with that antifreeze type oil in there, if that makes sense. So the higher the oil content, the more nutritious it is. Beautiful plant to grow. And then finally, I'm going to talk about black walnut here. Black walnuts, another king of nuts. I mean, I'm telling you people, they get to know your black walnut. It has the highest protein content of any tree nut, 7 grams per serving. Generous amount of manganese and substantial amount of omega-3s, rich source of vitamins and nutrients. Basically, black walnut is a superfood. So if you're complaining about mom making you crack the nuts and pull the nut meat out of those hard things, just know it's really good for you. And even if you don't make it out wild crafting for black walnuts, know that you can order them. Heartland Nuts and More is out of Valparaiso. And they've been selling black walnut nut meats for a long time now. You can order these online. I highly recommend you do that if you haven't, or if you're not able to collect your own. Look to Heartland Nuts and More. You'll be glad you did. And walnuts and butternuts, yeah, important trees for local wildlife. The foliage hosts a myriad of Lepidoptera, meaning butterflies, and the large nuts help sustain squirrels and other rodents. And they do produce juglone that can stunt other plants, but most native plants that evolved within the range of black walnuts are unfazed by juglone. So juglone is, don't even think about it. It's not an issue with plants. It's an issue with rhododendrons. It's an issue with azaleas, but of our native woodland species under a black walnut just kind of shrug their shoulders. Hostas do fine under walnuts. So it's an overblown thing, that whole juglone thing. Plants like tomatoes and peppers and eggplant do not like walnuts, but the last time I checked, we're not putting our vegetable gardens underneath our walnuts anyway. There's what it looks like when they're ripening in the summer. So this is something I'm trying this year. We have it steeping right now. So I collected the walnuts probably 3 weeks ago when they're still small and green, only about an inch. So Nocino is another Italian-based product. It's a black walnut. This is a black walnut liqueur. And of course, in Italy, they use the English walnut, but there's recipes online for the black walnut liqueur. And so you just take the unripened black walnut and you can actually cut it open very easily with a paring knife. And then you can see the developing nut inside of there that's still soft. Then you just put those halved nuts, or actually you can quarter them, is what the recipe I found recommended doing, and then put them in a jar and then fill the jar with vodka or pure grain alcohol, and then let that steep. And all the tannins are going to get drawn out of that nut meat, and it turns your alcohol that's rich, deep brown, almost black color. And there's lots of tannins in there. Well, anyway, I just encourage you, we don't want to talk too much about it. I just encourage you to look it up. There's the word Nocino or Nocino. I can't remember how it's pronounced, but very well. It's cost a lot of money online ordering the things. So I'm figuring something that costs that much to order that product must be good to make. Again, the cost comes in time. I'm going to have to let this steep for at least 30 to 60 days, take it out, and then add some mulling spices to it and let it sit in there for another 30 days. And then you basically let the jar sit for up to a year while it mellows. So there you go. It's a great product though. And then I also like to infuse roasted black walnuts in bourbon as well. Makes for a great bourbon thing. Okay, I didn't do horrible. I'm sorry to keep you guys after. It's just such a hard subject for me to try to cover it all. And but I can't believe I actually made it to the end, Brianna. That's
the first time we did it.
First time, happy. Right?
This is incredible. Well, thank you so much, Bob. Seriously, every time you come, I just sit here in awe of everything that you have to say. I love every second of it. So thank you so much again for being with us a third time. You are incredible.
Oh, I appreciate it. And yeah, don't be at awe at me, be at awe that these plants, there's all this stuff out there for us to try and for us to get, right? It's like, yes. I'm just that guy that's kind of purveying that information. And yeah, oh, and I'm seeing lots of great comments. So good stuff, you guys. I wish I would have had to try that. That's interesting. Mikey says, I never thought of that because both walnut and pecan make my mouth bleed, so I don't eat them. Interesting. Well, interesting. Yes, hickories and pecans are related. So great question, Dawn.
And I will send all of the chat to Bob just because I think there were some questions in there that we didn't get to. So we'll hopefully get all those answered, and I'll send a follow-up email with some of the resources Bob talked about. So hopefully your hand wasn't going crazy. I got you covered. No worries. And again, this was recorded, so if you missed anything, want to rewatch it, it'll be posted on Conservation Nebraska's YouTube channel in just a couple of weeks. Other than that, thank you so much, everybody, for coming, and have a fantastic night and summer. And there's so much love in the chat box. Again, Bob, you are incredible. We love having you here.
Oh, I appreciate it. And thank you guys for all the great comments in there. And, you know, let's go wild and have some foraging fun.
Rock on. See you, everybody.